This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on PM's address to Indian Chamber of Commerce and prospects of Indian economy. The participants are A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Shishir Sinha, journalist.
Mr. Bhattacharya, in a span of 10 days, Prime Minister Narendra Modi addresses industry leader twice. On June 2nd, his punchline was, "We will definitely get back the growth." And today he said that time has come to make bold decisions and investments. How do you correlate these two?
I think it's a dynamic situation. Things are moving quite rapidly. When he spoke to the CII, I think the Moody's downgrade was in the backdrop. And when he spoke today to the Indian Chamber of Commerce, the backdrop was the Standard & Poor's rating, which kept India at the same, the last notch of investment grade, and showing that the growth will come back next year. Actually, they're talking about a growth rate of almost 8%, and Fitch rating is also. I think the outlook today is that yes, this is a crisis, but this crisis has to be handled and seen as an opportunity to revive growth. The important challenge, of course, would be how to make that growth sustainable, and how do you make sure that the growth that you achieve next year after the current year's contraction, that growth takes as quickly as possible to the GDP level that prevailed in the past. Because after serious contraction that the economy will go through in 2019-20, it will be good to see a growth rate of 8%, 9% in 2021-22, but it has to be seen that that growth has to be sustainable so that we can regain our earlier size of the economy. Please remember that it is only the size of the economy which will be able to create more jobs, more investments, and therefore the virtuous cycle can be ensured only if we can expand the size of the economy. Growth is important, but at this point in time, I think we need to focus also a lot more on size of the economy and its sustainability.
The Prime Minister talked about that the pandemic will be a turning point of the country. How do you read this line?
Well, I think he is looking at it from a policy point of view. At one level, he is introduced this new idea of the self-reliant India, wherein he wants India to compete with other producers in the world and make the Indian industry strong and competitive. A lot of commentators have pointed out that in a desire to be self-reliant, the dangers of protectionism should not be overlooked. But there are also many people from the government side who have explained the philosophy of the self-reliant India as not looking inwards, but making the domestic economy so strong and competitive that it does not make India reliant for basic needs and everything on other countries. So that, to my mind, is a new perspective he's trying to lend to the Indian economy. The second aspect that he's probably looking at is how India can become an alternative location for global supply chains. Because after what has happened, in China, the pandemic, the global spread of this pandemic, and how various countries are little wary of depending on only one country or a couple of countries for meeting their requirements for global supply chains, there is this tendency to spread your risks wider among larger countries and source countries. So my sense is that will be a different kind of an aspect which the Prime Minister is probably hinting at, that is what there will be the new challenges, how to let India exploit that opportunity that exists in a crisis.
I would like to quote what he invoked Swami Vivekananda in his speech, and I quote, "The simplest method to be worked upon at present is to induce Indians to use their own produce and get market for Indian products in other countries." End of quote. Mr. Bhattacharya, how these words of wisdom can be inspiring in converting pandemic into opportunity? How you can relate Swamiji quote and the opportunities which are being available at this moment?
Well, I think the Swami Vivekananda's comment came in the larger context of rebuilding India, in a sense that the challenges for India, both in terms of economy as well as the country, arose out of foreign dominance and also of a domestic industry which was being exploited by the colonial powers. I think the situation today is different. Situation is largely induced by the COVID-19 crisis, wherein India probably can play the role of being an alternative market for global supply chains or global value chains, and at the same time India can use its inherent competitive advantages both in terms of a large market as well as the relatively cheaper and qualified workforce. So these are all advantages. I think he is trying to imbibe the spirit of Swami Vivekananda and using it for a kind of a economic revival. As the slogan goes, as an economic idea goes, I think this is kind of a vision that is worth aspiring for. But I think this has to be followed up by his team of officials and policymakers to come up with specific policies that liberate Indian industry, that encourages Indian industry and trade to face up to competition, improve the ease of doing business within the country. So these are the labor reforms, not the kind of labor reforms that we saw in an ad hoc fashion by some states, and that too for a limited period of time, which does not create a sustainable situation, only a short-term fix. So you need sustainable policy changes and policy reforms in all factor markets, factors of production like land, labor, capital, as well as entrepreneurship. And these reforms will have to come to help the country realize the kind of goals or the vision that the Prime Minister has outlined.
He called for pulling the Indian economy out of command and control mode and taking it towards plug and play mode. Now, just for the sake of our listeners, what exactly is plug and play approach?
Well, the command and control is what we used to be before 1991, wherein there were restrictions, there were controls, and then the government would decide what is to be produced, how many quantities. The licensing regime, the Inspector Raj, I think the reforms of 1991 have moved the country away from the command control mode, although there have been many occasions in the past where you did see some return of some of the command control tendencies. The perils of command control regime is not completely gone, but I think he is now introducing a new philosophy of plug and play, which is a kind of a system in which the conditions are readied and enhanced and equipped in a way that participants in any economic activity can take advantage of any enterprise, whether it is production or whether it is service delivery, without any problems or any hindrances. The plug and play method would essentially mean the infrastructure will be kept in readiness. So the India Infrastructure Pipeline project has to be implemented to make sure that the infrastructure is in place so that you can use the plug and play philosophy to help Indian industry and the Indian markets and the Indian people. Without plug and play and without a proper infrastructure and without a conducive policy environment, my feeling is that the plug and play philosophy will not be able to work. So behind the plug and play is the necessity of creating a platform of ready infrastructure and reformist policies that allow the economic participants, producers, consumers, investors, savers, spenders to take full advantage of the environment. And that is what I think he meant by plug and play.
Prime Minister in his speech listed various major reforms announced under Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign, just like expanding the scope of definition of micro, small and medium enterprises, then arranging special funds to support MSMEs, decisions related to insolvency and bankruptcy code, creation of project development cells for fast tracking of investment. So out of these, which one you think is the most critical and why?
The most critical is the change in the definition of the MSME sector, and the MSME sector definition has been enhanced by a big margin. What used to be 20 crore of investment has now become 50 crore investment. What used to be 100 crore turnover now has become 250 crore turnover. Remember that the MSME space is now accounting for almost 99% of Indian companies. It is accounting for more than, I think earlier it was 46%, now it is more than 50% of exports. It certainly will be accounting for more than 30% of India's GDP. So the definitional change has given new lift to the MSME sector, and if this MSME sector now sees, particularly the larger among the MSME sectors, I think will be able to take full advantage of the policy and space that has been created for them. And earlier fear that if you do well, you grow big and lose the policy support that you were enjoying while remaining an MSME unit, that fear is gone, because you can grow up to 250 crore of turnover without losing the advantages of MSME. Remember that these limits need to go up even further because the global benchmarks are even higher. But this is a good step and in the right direction. So to my mind, this measure will actually pave the way for a bigger play for India's MSME sector, and these are the units which actually are the heart of India Inc.
Sir, he talked about reforms in the field of agriculture, such as changes in APMC Act and legal framework for contract farming. However, bigger challenge is small farmland. Nearly 86% farmers are having land below 2 hectares, and nearly 76% have less than 1 hectare. So how these farmers can take advantage of reforms being initiated?
Very important initiative in the agriculture side was the amendment of the Essential Commodities Act. Then came the relaxation in the APMC Act, which allow the farmers to sell their produce directly to people without going through the mandi route. The third change, to my mind, was the interstate trading, which again frees up the Indian farmer to go out of his state and sell his or her produce to the other state without any restrictions. And the fourth change, to my mind, was the contract farming was allowed. The large chunk, almost 86%, as you said, have land which is less than 2 hectares. Now, it is important that the next phase of agriculture sector reforms will probably be to the implementation and expanding the idea of producing farm companies, which can probably 4 farmers can get together, and then they take better advantage of contract farming, because when you are seeing 4 farmers pooling together their 2 hectares of land each, they get a piece of 8 hectares of land, and that land can be more profitably be used for contract farming, where there is a written contract between somebody who wants to grow something and commit himself or herself to paying a certain price after the crop grows. So I think contract farming and land pooling, coming together of farmers, will be the necessary corollary steps that will flow out of these steps that have been taken.
With a quote from Guruvar Rabindranath Tagore, which the Prime Minister quoted from his famous poem, Nutan Yuger Khor, that means the morning of a new era. The Prime Minister exhausted the industry to understand the opportunities available in the current challenges and said that only marching feet can create a new path. There should be no delay now. Do you think that India Inc. is really ready to take on these challenges?
His admission that it is a crisis, and the crisis provides an opportunity. I think that itself says that India as an economy probably has no other option other than using this crisis as an opportunity to revive growth and make sure that millions of people who may have gone below the poverty line because of this COVID crisis, now they are brought back and lifted above the poverty line. That, to my mind, will be a very, very big challenge.
Mr. Bhattacharya, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on PM's address to Indian Chamber of Commerce and prospects of Indian economy. The participants were A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Shishir Sinha, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.